So as I'm sure most of you saw, the starters for the NBA All-Star Game were announced yesterday, and although most of us Bulls fans were hoping that Lavine would be on it, he did fall short, as you can see from the starters who were voted in. I personally think the whole fan voting for the starters for the All-Star Game is a bit nonsense, mainly because you have a lot of fans who really don't know the game all that well, and it ends up just being a popularity contest at best. But that's neither here nor there at this point. They did change it up a little bit this year in having it be a weighted score between the fan vote, player vote, and media vote, so that was nice to see, and that there's a little bit more balance. But as you can see, we've got Giannis, Embiid, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie, and Bradley Beal in the backcourt. Zach Lavine came in fourth in the weighted vote, just behind James Harden and in front of Jaylen Brown for the Eastern Conference backcourt. Now, I think, some of us likely aren't surprised that Lavine didn't make the All-Star starters based on the voting, because he's not as recognized as some of the bigger names in the league unless you're a big NBA fan and you follow what most players are doing and how they're performing. So the question now is, will Lavine be selected as an All-Star reserve and finally make his first All-Star game and become the first Chicago Bull All-Star since Jimmy Butler, who he was actually ultimately traded for? So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bull Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Before I get into the video real quick, based on my last video, I thought I would share the results of the poll that I posted on the community page on who you guys thought was a worse coach between Fred Hoiberg and Jim Boylen, and the results were overwhelmingly Boylen at 96%, which I wasn't surprised by, because I do agree that although Hoiberg wasn't a good coach, he was nowhere near as bad as Jim Boylen was. And I think more importantly was the fact that Hoiberg didn't have that tough guy persona that Boylen tried to give off, and actually wasn't a jerk to the media and to the players. Hoiberg also wasn't really set up in the best position for success because of the front office. Anyway, enough about Jim Boylen and Fred Hoiberg though. Let's talk about Zach Lavine and whether he should be considered an all-star, because honestly, this year more than ever, Lavine deserves it, in my opinion, based on the kind of season he's having. I know that might surprise some of you guys, because if you've been following my channel, I am usually a little bit critical on Lavine because I have very high expectations of him. And it's really only on his decision making late in game and when he tries to play that hero ball that we're used to seeing from Lavine, because he's actually a very good playmaker when he wants to be. And I'll acknowledge that more recently he has been playing much smarter basketball, playing team ball, and even playing better defense. And he's been more efficient with his shooting as well. So by the numbers, Lavine should without a doubt be an all-star. But this is also somewhat of a biased Bulls fan talking, I'll acknowledge that. But if I try to look at this from an objective lens, let's just take a quick peek at Lavine's numbers so far this season. 28.5 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, and 5.2 assists. I mean, some of the all-stars in question that have been selected as starters, and even all-stars that have been selected to the game in the past, haven't put up numbers like these. Now, it's not just all about the numbers a player puts up, though. One big factor in a player being selected to an all-star game is their team's record, which the Bulls' record isn't that great. As of right now, we're 3 games behind 500, so Lavine doesn't have that in his favor. But then the argument can be made, well, if you're selecting Bradley Beal, whose team is one of the worst in the league, then why wouldn't Lavine get the nod when his team has performed better? Granted, Lavine hasn't put up the kind of scoring numbers that Beal has, and Beal has had an incredible season, especially in terms of his overall scoring efficiency. He's leading the entire league in scoring by far and away, but Lavine is also 6th in the league in terms of points per game right now. Right behind all players who are without a doubt all-stars. Lillard was the only one who wasn't voted as a starter, but he will be selected as a reserve. There's no question about that. So the statistics are in Zach's favor, despite his team not having the best record. The other thing that's in Zach's favor is that, historically speaking, the players that come just short in being voted in as all-star starters, generally, that has an influence on the coaches selecting the all-star reserves. As I mentioned, Lavine finished 4th in the weighted voting for the starters, behind Bradley Beal and Kyrie Irving, who were selected to start, and then just behind James Harden. Now, James Harden is going to be selected as a reserve. That's a given, mainly just because of the who he is, and given the amount of All-Star selections he's had previously, that tends to be an influence in a player getting selected once they've already become an All-Star. Now, the other guards that Lavine will be competing against for those 2 final spots on the All-Star roster, which are 2 guard positions, and then you also have 2 what they're calling wild card positions, essentially utility players if you were viewing at this from like a fantasy league perspective. So Harden is going to take one of those guard spots for the East. I have no doubt about that, which leaves 1 remaining guard opening and the 2 wild card spots. Now, Jaylen Brown has certainly made a case for why he should be selected as an All-Star, despite his team not being that great. I think people have had higher expectations of the Celtics and how they would perform, but still a better record than the Bulls. Then you also have Trae Young, who, to be honest, I really don't see how one can justify selecting him over Lavine. He's an incredible player, but he hasn't had as good of a season as Lavine has. And the Bulls actually have a better record than the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, barely better, but still better. I mean, then you have Ben Simmons, but he hasn't had the best season, at least for his standards anyway. However, his team has been one of the best in the league, and he's already been selected as an All-Star in the past, so that helps his case. I really can't see how Russell Westbrook should be an All-Star. You can argue that Fred VanVleet has a case for being one, but honestly, I think Lavine's biggest competition for an All-Star selection is Jaylen Brown. Now, say Jaylen Brown gets chosen over Lavine, that takes both of those reserve guard spots. Can he get one of those reserve wildcard roles? Well, now he's also being, compared and competing with other forwards and centers for those spots. So you have Jason Tatum, you have Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, even Jeremy Grant, who's had a great season thus far. We just got to see him play on Wednesday. But despite all of these great players, and I'm trying to see this from an unbiased lens, I don't see how you can't give Lavine the nod to take one of those available reserve spots, whether as a guard or taking one of the wildcard positions. He's had a better season than guys like Trae Young, Russell Westbrook, Ben Simmons, even Jimmy Butler, and I would argue Jason Tatum, just because he's missed quite a bit of time from the court. So in short, I do think Lavine not only should be an All-Star, but that he will be selected as an All-Star come February 23rd when the reserves are announced. I actually would be pretty surprised if he didn't. If you had asked me this last season, whether I thought Lavine should have been an All-Star, as close as I think he was to that mark, I don't think he should have been selected over some of the guys that did. So in my view, it made sense last season that he wasn't selected. But this year, I just don't see how they can overlook Lavine, given how he's been carrying this Bulls team, playing much better and smarter basketball as of late, and putting up incredible numbers that a lot of these other guys aren't even close to. But I would love to hear what you guys think, though. Do you think Lavine deserves to be an All-Star? And whether you think if he deserves to be or not, do you think he'll ultimately be selected by the league? Because it's different whether you think Lavine is an All-Star. Do you think he will actually be selected? The Bulls, by the way, guys, are taking on the Sixers tonight on ESPN. As always, I'll have a live chat here on the channel as well as the Discord, so feel free to join those if you like discussing the game while it's happening. And then, as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan. I post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.